So, good afternoon, you guys. I want to do a couple of tough videos, and I want to talk about the time that I was sexually harassed by my father. And I do want to mention that obviously, different generations and different attitudes do change. And also, one of the other reasons why I want to bring this up was that there was this really disturbing video online of this kid who was abused, and his father is a pastor. So what his father did was force him, his wife and his son to go on camera, and then he was talking about like how ungrateful the kid was. And then there's a video of this pastor tickling his son, and a lot of people were saying that he was aiming for the penis, like he was trying to tickle his son's penis. So what happened to me was that my father had an issue of slapping me on the butt and then chuckling like, and I also remember I did a story a few months ago where I talked about the time my dad lost his temper and he almost hit me with a vacuum cleaner. And it also ended when he slapped my butt one more time, really. And mind you, that I was in middle school, so I was like 11, 12 years old or something like that. And obviously, there's a difference when you are, like spanking a child who's 4 or 5. There's a difference between slapping a kid on the ass like they're a girlfriend, and then there's also a difference between slapping a kid on the ass when they're a preteen, And then my dad would say things like, Byron, you need to wear shorts. Come on, Byron, show off those beautiful, sexy legs, and other things like that. So I do understand that that's not okay and that's not appropriate. And I do have to sidetrack for a second. That sometimes I also have to understand that not every touch is sexual, because I remember I was in St. Louis and there was this guy who had a daughter who was an athlete, so he was like her back and everything like that. And honestly, if let's say a stranger did that to my kid, I would fucking clock him across the head. I don't care if he was my kid's coach or whatever. But if anybody did that to my son or daughter, I would fucking punch them aside the temple, really, and be like, "Hey, you're raping my daughter. Hey, you're sexually assaulting my daughter. Don't put your hands on somebody else's kids." Like honestly, I would do that if somebody did that to my kid, or if somebody did that to me. I would turn around and be like, "What the fuck is the matter with you? You don't put your fucking hands on me. Do you want a fist across your jaw, really?" So we have to understand a couple of things. That number one, it's kind of giving me some anger and PTSD because I was at work today and I had a coworker buy me breakfast, but they're patting me on the shoulder. I almost like knocked them out, really, because I was kind of saying, hey, I've been sexually harassed a couple times at work, and also I work a lot of hours. I'm usually very tired. I also work a lot of hours. I'm only focused on me and my job. I'm not focused on like, friendships or people that I know, really. I'm focused on my shit, really. So I don't know. So sometimes I may have people who know me and I don't know them, really. But it's gotten to a point with me where I feel like a powder keg because obviously, it's respect, really. And it's all kind of like the thing that I've been taught throughout my entire life. The respect and disrespect that I show matters, but the disrespect people the disrespect that the respect and disrespect that I show others matters, but the disrespect and the respect people shows me doesn't matter. That's what I've been taught by my therapist. So there's a couple of things about this. That number one, to go back to my father, that's not appropriate. Number two is that I remember like telling people that what I'd be eating my food, and my dad. I remember like one time at the dinner table, I was eating my food, and we eat my food, and my dad just like grabbed my wrist, like, you're not feeding yourself. You got to like turn your head and answer your little brother's questions. And I also remember like another time, same thing. Like I took too big of a piece of hot dog. My dad took my hand. He took the fork out of it and threw it across the room. Or I remember like another time I was playing video games with my brother. Fucking gravity. Sorry guys. Or one time I was playing video games with my brother, and I was doing this, and my younger brother was and my younger brother was like giving my dad a piggyback ride. So my dad was kind of squatting down so my little brother can do that. And he wanted me to check it out, really. So I remember my dad saying, and me and my older brother were like, this is stupid. We're not turning around to check out some hijinks. So my dad grabbed our heads and he was like, you're going to look at your little brother. You're going to look at your little brother, guys. And it's like, the fuck, Ram. And also, I understand too. I grew up in the 90s where, as I said, children were treated just like slaves. You can slap a kid, you can put your hands on a kid, you can smack them, you can choke them, and other shit like that, really. And it's also kind of like, as I said before, um, that it's also had a lot of impact on my psyche and stuff like that too. Like I remember, like I had a girlfriend in high school, and there were many times, it was consensual. She was okay with it, but I would slap her on the ass in public and other things like that. But part of that would stem from how I was kind of raised. I was kind of raised in those roles, really, where where you just get your way, really. Or it's almost like, that's one of the reasons why I don't have dogs, because I've seen animal abuse, and that's one of the reasons why people are very physical with dogs. Sometimes it's a control issue, or sometimes that's what people do with kids, or if they have a wife, or if they're a woman that's kind of like an alpha. Sometimes they're like, hey, you know what? I gotta beat up my man. I gotta beat up my kids, or there's a man, he may be like, I gotta beat up my wife, I gotta beat up my significant other if they're not a woman, I gotta beat up my children, really, or I gotta put my hands on my children. So it's, as I said before, really, I think the first thing is keep your fucking hands to yourself. Number two is that when you have children, it's not a free reign to say, hey, this is my child, I can do whatever the hell I want to them. And I also think that it's unfortunate, but children need to come forward, and say, hey, my dad did this. Hey, my dad did that. This is how they were conducting themselves. And maybe I need to be put in child protective services, or maybe they need to be put in a rehabilitation program to be taught how to be a better parent and stuff like that. Because I remember, like, my father, when I was in middle school, he was like, I remember, like, we had a baptism party, and my dad was calling me a fucking asshole because there were like over 100 people, and he expected me to know the names of all 100 people, really. Yeah, these are people I've not met. And he wasn't like, okay, I'm going to quiz you, whatever. But there was just always like that type of unapologetically being disrespectful, really. And it's one of the reasons why I don't even love or care about my parents. Like, I think, like, as I said, like, I just have patience. I would say, what, and it's also rough too, because I'm adopted, really. So I have like three fathers. But I always kind of have that mentality of, I don't care if you adopted me. I don't care if you put me through college. I don't care if you taught me to use a toilet. I don't care if you had to wipe my ass when I was a kid. I don't care if you motivated me to be a hard worker. If you disrespected me, if you crossed a couple lines with me, fuck all that. Because, I was always been taught by my therapist of, parents are not perfect. Or, what, that's just your father and his ways. Because that's also another issue with the older generation, is that they kind of always have that mentality of, children need to forgive their kids. Like, I need to be like, that's just Papa, and his ways, really. So I got to go. As I said, I'm going to Japan in a few weeks, but, if my dad was dying, I got to be like, oh, Papa, I got to cancel my trip, and I got to be with you in your dying moments, really. And maybe use all that money on all those refunds to, buy you a tombstone, or help towards paying for a casket, really. No. If you disrespect me in life, really, then I don't really have that much remorse for you. You treat others the way you want to be treated. But I also understand too that, it's gonna be lifelong trauma, because, like, honestly, I could have lost my job today by losing my crap, really. But I think that, as a promise to myself, not every touch is sexual, but also too, we gotta stand up for ourselves. Like, for example, when I was at work, I was sexually harassed by a coworker. I reported it. I was sexually harassed by another coworker. I talked to him personally. When I was on Delta Airlines, I was sexually harassed by a stewardess, because every single time this woman was talking to somebody else, she would walk up to me, put her hand on her shoulder for 2 or 3 minutes, and I was kind of like, hey, what's this, really? And she did that another time, and then it was bad, because I think I said I waited a couple of weeks. I said maybe that really isn't, but I should have been more like straightforward and been like, hey, what? That made me uncomfortable, and it's disrespectful, really, because, again, the roles were reversed. If I went to work and I put my hands on a patient that was a female, and I was talking to another patient, and I went back and I did that like 10 minutes later, and the same exact thing, put my hands on his shoulder for, like, over 10 minutes, for 4 or 5 minutes while I'm talking to somebody else, really, I would not have a job, really. And I also think that's another big issue in this culture, is that sometimes, with women, women are allowed to put their hands on men, really. And that's another big problem. But also the other issue is that a man's not allowed to put their hands on a woman, um, unless they're wife or girlfriend, really. But in general, too, also, like I've said earlier, that sometimes there are parents that say, hey, you know what, I have a child, and part of having a child means I'm the dad, I'm the mom, I'm the parent. The kid has to take my shit, really. If I smack them in public, I smack them in public. If I say, you know what, you're a fucking asshole, or you're black, or you have a learning disability, or you have a mental illness, so be it. I'm the father. I can say whatever the hell I want about my kid. I can slap my kid on the butt. If they're young, I can tickle them, or they have a bad, if they look kind of mopey or they're having a bad day, I can run up to them and tickle them, or I can poke them in the sides, or I can startle them, or I can have my fun with them. Or like I said, like when I was a kid, I had rules. Like in summertime, you had to wear shorts. Show off those sexy legs and other things like that. Who the fuck talks to their kid like that? I mean, my parents are gay, so it's actually an extra level of cringe, really. But who the fuck talks to their kid like that? Um, that's a child protective services call right there. And as I said, I think that I'm happy that there's a lot more. Sometimes for the better, there's a lot more of kids standing up for themselves. Sometimes that's needed. I also understand that like there's ICE protests and there's kids like skipping class or kids running in traffic or things like that. Yes, kids have freedom of speech to a certain degree, but that's kind of where things should be limited. But when a kid says, "Hey, you know what? My dad's slapping me on the ass and chuckling," or "Hey, my dad's saying, I'm a fucking asshole. I'm a fucking piece of shit. I'm mentally ill. I'm stupid. I'm retarded. I'm other things like that," and they bring it to a teacher, and then maybe the parent gets like parenting classes, or they kind of get like publicly shamed by other adults in their community. That's all really appropriate, really. Or like how with my videos, I talk a lot of crap about the shit that I dealt with when I was raised and how it impacts me, and that's kind of my way of making peace with it. But as I said, there are a couple things we have to understand that sometimes not every touch is sexual. So if somebody pats me on the back at work or other things like that, I gotta say, hey, I don't feel comfortable with that because I have a complicated past around people putting their hands on me. Number two is that in general, out of respect, we do not put our hands on people. Number three is that when people have kids, you have to be respectful of kids because obviously we do live in a world where parents, as I said before and I'll say it again, if I have a daughter and she's in her 20s and she doesn't want to hug me, if I just grab her and I hug her and say, you're going to hug your father, or my parents are gay and for a while I had some of my brothers don't not want to hug them because they had religious beliefs, and my dad just grabs them and says, you're going to hug me. You're not going to be afraid to hug me because I'm gay and whatever. That's kind of like force and control, really. But you have to be respectful of people's boundaries because, like I said, I the last time I ever was home and had like I spent time with my parents, I don't even remember really. I think it was maybe Thanksgiving, like maybe 15, 16 years ago. But one of the reasons why I don't hang out with my father was because of like power issues. Like he criticizes me for living with my brother, even though I pay my brother rent. He criticizes me for traveling so much, really, not getting my own place. He criticized me for not settling down and having a kid. He criticizes me for having mental illness. He criticized me for antisocial choices. Like I think it was like a year and a half ago I visited all 50 states. I haven't got a phone call from him saying congratulations or whatever, really. But the point of it is, and that's also another issue, is that why don't, if you disrespect your kids, you're like, hey, you know what, I can put my hands on my kids, or hey, I can be boss, I can be controlling, I can be undermining, I can smack my kid, I can pet tap them on the shoulder, I can punch them in the arm, I can do all that crap, really. It just says, hey, I don't have respect for my kid. And that's one of the reasons why, people like me just walk when our parents want to say, hey, you know what, I'm 50, I'm 60, I'm 70, can I spend some like time with you? No, if you disrespect me through life, why should I be that forgiving, really? Because, forgiveness is important, but sometimes you gotta be unforgiving, really, and ultimately keep your fucking hands to yourself, really. And slapping your kid on the butt just because you want to find humorous and whatever is never appropriate.